What's going on, everybody? This is Jared Sandler welcoming you into another episode of the Just a Sec Conversation. We've reached 60. This is the big 6-0, and it's with my pal from ESPN, Tim MacMahon. When I moved back to DFW in 2014, Tim was one of the first people I met whom I didn't know previously. I was obviously familiar with Tim's work, but working at the ESPN radio affiliate here in DFW, I had a chance to host some shows with Tim and work with Tim and learn from Tim, who has done such an exceptional job of covering the NBA, not just the Mavericks, but the Rockets and the Grizzlies and the Jazz and the group of teams that have kind of been a part of his scope of coverage. And of course, along with that, comes with just covering the NBA from a national standpoint. He's experienced on radio, on TV, the written word. He's someone who's accomplished a lot and definitely doesn't have the most traditional journey. And really enjoyed my chance to chat with Tim. As always, would appreciate if you'd consider subscribing, liking, commenting, or just sharing this link. It really doesn't take a lot of time. You don't have to do it, but if you did, I'd really appreciate it. It certainly goes a long way. Again, it would really mean a lot. But without further ado, here we go. Episode 60 of the Just a Sec Conversation with Tim MacMahon. All right, Tim, I always like to ask people about their childhood and their experiences. So I'm curious, what stands out to you about your childhood that has kind of influenced the person that you've become, whether it's professionally or just the various characteristics that help define you personally?
Well, I was probably a lot like you, except for just much taller in that, I just played sports. That was my passion. I played sports year round. I wasn't a kid who, ever had a bunch of toys. I had a football. I had a basketball and a hoop. I had, baseball and gloves and bats and all that kind of stuff. And basically, whatever season it was is what my favorite sport was. And I was a kid who collected all the baseball and basketball and football cards. And, back in the day, obviously we didn't have as much sports on TV, but what we had, I consumed and I subscribed to Sports Illustrated. I swiped the sports section, of the paper my dad got every day. And so that was always just a huge passion of mine. Honestly, when I was a kid, I was delusional. I thought that my toughest professional decision was going to be which sport am I going to go professional in? Am I going to be, first of all, am I going to be a major league pitcher or will I play first base? Maybe I can do both. I don't know. Can I do that and still play in the NBA? Whatever. So obviously, it's a little bit, a little bit delusional on my athletic ability, but there's no doubt that sports has always been my biggest passion.
What pushed you to sports? Was it just that was the language that you spoke in the house growing up? Was there an influence of a parent or a sibling or something, or was it just you kind of on your own?
Yeah, my dad was always very into sports. It was kind of the way that we connected. He coached some of my teams, and he always was very encouraging of that. It was also the one thing that he wouldn't be cheap about. I knew I'd get the best equipment. And that sort of thing. It was fun. It was fun to go out and to play pickup basketball or even just to, shoot around in the backyard. It was fun to play in leagues. And like I said, football and football season, basketball and basketball season, baseball in the summer until honestly I got to about 13 and I was like, man, it's bleeping hot. I don't want to do baseball practice anymore. But yeah, I think a combination of kind of my dad's influence and just, it was something that I really enjoyed.
And then when did writing get into the picture? How did you get introduced to writing in the way that maybe would lead to something professionally? And how did you get your first opportunity as a writer?
So, I always enjoyed writing. Growing up, I was always pretty good at it, blah, blah, blah. But really, when journalism kind of became something that I considered an option professionally, it was because the reality set in on my limited athletic ability, to be honest with you. I went to, first of all, I thought I was for sure going to be a D1 talent. That wasn't the case. So I go to this D2 school in Florida to hoop, and I'm playing power forward. Well, the next smallest power forward is 6'8". I'm 6'4". So it was to the point where it was pretty obvious, like I was going to be waving a towel on the end of a bench, and I was like, man, I don't want to do that. And then I was majoring in business, and honestly, business classes bored the hell out of me. So it was kind of a combination of me realizing that college basketball and majoring in business wasn't the way I was going to go. So I ended up quitting the basketball program, which let me tell you, the coach wasn't real disappointed by that. And then decided I was going to transfer. And, I was, like I said, I was at school in Florida, decided I was going to transfer back home. And I realized that I wanted to have a career in sports because I wanted to have a career that I enjoyed. I didn't want to be a 9-to-5 kind of guy because I just didn't see myself doing that. And this was pretty early in the Tickets tenure. And I remember, I'd been listening to Ticket. I was like, honestly, I was like, I know as much about sports as these guys. I can do that. Are you kidding me? And because we all know sports talk radio is probably the easiest job in the world. Anyways, and so it's funny. I told Mike Reiner this at the Cowboys training camp years later, but he was actually, unbeknownst to him, a pretty significant interest because I ended up at North Texas, and I was majoring in radio, TV, film. And I went to a ticket stock, and I just, went up and said hi to him or whatever. And I said, hey, I'm majoring in radio, TV, film at UNT. You have any advice for me? And his advice was find a better major. I'm serious. That was his advice. He said, find something that's going to give you more, give you broader options, whether it's English or broadcast journalism. And he kind of explained to me how limited the radio, TV, film options were. And, I'd give myself, a lot better, potential pathways if I did something else. And so the broadcast journalism, I took his advice. I changed my major to broadcast journalism. Part of that was I had to take a newspaper reporting class where you're doing, you're basically working for free for the NT Daily. And I remember I was covering the track program and the club baseball program. And so then that led to me getting an actual staff writer position at the NT Daily for $7 an hour. No, it wasn't, not even been $5-something an hour.
Those are the big ones.
So I did that for a semester and a half, covered the football program, covered the men's basketball program. And the great Richard Durrett was the sports editor at the Denton Chronicle at the time. And I'll never forget, he just came up to me in the media room after a pregame dinner at the Super Pit, and basically said, "Hey, what would you think of coming and working at the DRC part time?" And and that was, I do remember that was definitely $7 an hour, and part time meant 39 hours a week is what it turned out to be. So they didn't have to give me any kind of benefits. I do, and I remember $7 an hour very, very clearly because old Dickie D, as you know, the late great Richard Durrett, could be a little high-strung. And this was back in the day. I was funny because we did like the old school newspaper layout. We had at the NT Daily we had like the computer program. Well, at the DRC it was, you're laying it out on a piece of paper, pike a pole, all that. You're running into the back shop. They've got the wax paper. You're making your cuts with the X-Acto knife. And so, a small newspaper with that system, you can imagine how hectic Friday nights during football season were on deadline. I'll just never forget, Dickie D would be sprinting back and forth, from the back shop up to the sports section with his X-Acto knife in hand and just, hey, you got this guy? And I'd always say, Dickie D, $7 an hour. You get what you pay for. But that was a great opportunity for me because, I was covering area high schools, but he also let me help out a lot on the North Texas coverage. And then when he got hired, it was not too long after I got there. He got hired to go to begin his career at the Dallas Morning News, and he convinced the Morning News sports editor that they should, because it's owned by the same company, and they use the UNT coverage from the Denton Record Chronicle, he convinced Gary Level, the Morning News sports editor, that he should give the North Texas beat to me, I had like 12 hours left in North Texas, had basically zero experience, and our boy Dickie D, basically lobbied, got me an interview up there, sat in on the interview with me, and got me the gig.
And did you ever finish at North Texas?
Yeah, I had what I call a senior era. Like I said, when I got hired when I was full-time at the Record Chronicle, I had 12 hours left. And I actually had that fall semester, I had a 12-hour course load, and I flunked them all. I was working like 60, small-town papers. I was working like 60, 70 hours a week. And I just stopped going to class. I did not have time. And so, ended up, I was there for 3 years. And over the course of that 3 years, I got those 12 hours done. Basically what I would do is I would just take an hour, or a class, 3-hour class each summer session and get it done. And it got to a point, there was one class I had to take in the fall because they only offered it in the fall. It was like a very specific reporting class that I'd failed before because you had to go to city council meetings, blah, blah, blah. Oh, actually, they finally offered in the spring, and that's when I was able to finish because the fall, you're covering football. You've got the crossover of basketball. It was just impossible. You have to go to these city council meetings I just couldn't do. But other than that, I had like a bunch of upper-level elective hours left. And I went to the academic advisor. I wish I could remember the guy's name. Nice guy. He was the academic advisor for the North Texas football program. And I basically said, hey, I interviewed some of these guys. Some of them ain't so sharp. What upper-level electives are they in? And he gave me a specific professor who, tended to not be too tough. We'll put it like that. And that's how I got some of my upper level electives done.
That's great.
I was a great scholar.
So you started the Denton Record Chronicle. What were some of the skills as a writer that came naturally to you, and what were the things at that point, if you can recall, that you really needed to work on?
I mean, obviously you needed to work on everything, but just kind of I felt like I had a pretty good feel for what stories were interesting. I felt like the writing stuff came pretty naturally. The volume, I was able to generate a ton of volume, which, especially when you're working at a small newspaper and, covering an entire college program plus helping out on high schools is necessary. At the time, and it's funny because I no longer feel this way, but at the time, I felt like I was able to write very fast, like I was good on deadline, which honestly, I've been doing ESPN for a decade and not really having to deal with a hard newspaper-style deadline. I'd be in big trouble if I went back to that right now. That's something I'd have to recreate. But I was raw, and then there were times when perhaps my judgment wasn't the best. I remember one story. I won't mention his name. He's still in college football now, but there was an assistant coach, a position coach, who was hilarious and and Daryl Dickey was the head coach there, and he let me stand on the sideline and watch every practice, which you don't find in college football now, even at the smaller programs. But and I used to just crack up with this coach. He had all these hilarious sayings, and so I wrote a story on basically just what a character and what kind of like a harsh, hilarious personality this position coach was. And I tweaked one of the sayings that he had in there. The saying was, if you're looking for sympathy, can I cuss? I can't cuss, can I?
We can always edit it out. You can
Okay.
You can make sure we know which word it is.
The saying was, if you're looking for sympathy, it's between shit and syphilis in the dictionary. And I said, well, I'll PG-13 it. I said, so the quote in the story was, if you're looking for sympathy, it's between spit and syphilis in the dictionary. Well, I didn't consider that the whole syphilis thing is something that maybe wasn't necessarily appropriate for a small town newspaper, and wasn't something like the school administration would find nearly as funny as I did. So I remember Steve Tracy was my sports editor. He replaced Dirt as a sports editor. By the way, he was a huge influence and a huge help to me too, because he not only was willing to allow me to cover North Texas, which is something the sports editor had always done there, but was very encouraging of it, very helpful. And he's a guy who had a long career at the Dallas Morning News, and then got out of journalism for a while and decided to get back in it just because he was passionate about it. So it was a great influence on me. Anyways, I remember that story. It ran on a Thursday, and North Texas had a Thursday. I believe if I remember this correctly, they had a Thursday night football game. And I remember him walking up the stairs at the old Fouts Field, to the press box up there, looking at me and just shaking his head the whole time, and calling me out of the press box and basically giving me the "What the hell were you thinking, dog?" So yeah, not that my judgment's necessarily improved 100%, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was when I was 23.
One of the things I think that stands out about you is a willingness to ask tough questions and not back down when it's met with resistance or confrontation. How did that develop? Was that just something naturally that you possessed?
I mean, one of my favorite quotes from the NBA the last couple of years, and I didn't get it, I wasn't there, but I certainly related to it, was when Russell Westbrook said, I've been blessed with the ability not to give a fuck. I've been blessed with that ability. I was always, this will surprise you, but I was always kind of the kid who liked messing with people and, liked getting under people's skin. And it's not even necessarily that I enjoy getting under people's skin, but I don't mind when people get mad at me. Like it's been, God, I grew up in a family of 7 kids. Trust me, my brothers and sisters were mad at me a lot. I'm used to it. My dad, so teachers, coaches. There's a long list of people who I've always, and so my deal as far as that goes in journalism is, I just always have felt that if the facts are on my side and it's a legitimate question, if I'm being fair, then if people want to get mad at me, that's fine, that's okay, they can do that. But as long as I felt like I was, asking the right question, I just wasn't going to back down.
Now, you've covered a coach in Rick Carlisle who isn't always the most friendly, warm, and I know that, you have to be around and kind of earn respect, I guess, on his end. But how did you go about developing that relationship and maybe overcoming or knocking down some barriers and getting him to be forthcoming? Because I don't know if Rick is more honest with someone in DFW who covers the team than he is with you.
Well, you know what? I always have felt that with Rick, look, sometimes it's going to be tense, and obviously there have been times where he hadn't been thrilled with me, and, there have been times where press conferences have become awkward and look, there have been conversations in his office that have been a hell of a lot worse than anything you've seen in public. But I do feel like I was able to earn his respect because Rick respects work ethic, first and foremost. Like, if he knows somebody's working hard, if he knows someone's trying to be fair, if he knows somebody's ultimately really kind of going about it the right way in terms of trying to do the job right, I think he respects that. I think where Rick really is tough on people is if he thinks they're lazy or like. And I don't necessarily think this is always fair, but Rick has a tendency to be really tough on the local TV guys who pop in once in a blue moon. And, I think you have to understand how their jobs are different than a beat writer or somebody like me who's, NBA specific. But, there have been several times, and I'm sure you've seen it, where, the local TV guy will kind of pop in with a lot of times even a softball question, and Rick just really kind of makes a point to shoot it down. And again, I don't necessarily think that's fair to those guys, but I think it is a case of, the way to earn Rick's respect is to, is to be thorough, to be, to be consistent, persistent, all that. And honestly, Rick can be difficult to deal with sometimes just because he is a control freak, obviously. But I don't find our relationship to be difficult. I think it's been a really good relationship that a lot of people inaccurately judge based on some tense exchanges in press conferences.
So when that does happen, let's say you write something or there's something that goes down where he's clearly upset at you. Do you, and I guess there's varying degrees of being upset, but do you, let's say it's to the level where it can't just be ignored and then a couple of days later you come back and everything's okay. How do you go about making sure that working relationship is maintained when he's disappointed in you, but maybe not unfairly so because he's got his agenda, but you check the boxes you mentioned earlier where you were fair, you did things the right way, but, because of his agenda or anyone's agenda, not necessarily Rick's, they're upset.
Look, with Rick, it's never something that's happened. There's never been any kind of lingering issues between us because I think, especially, and you try to have, if there's that kind of friction where you really need to, talk it out, that's something that I think any reporter would tell you is best to do, when there's not cameras and other people around. And so we've had some of those discussions, and honestly, I think, Rick has cussed me out. He's kicked me out of his office. He's hung up on me. And then, the next day or the next time I saw him, everything's been fine. You're going to know how he feels, but he's not a guy who's held grudges. There have been people who have held grudges. I mean, there's been, just off the top of my head, there's 3 particular players who were pretty prominent Mavericks players, all, highly paid starters who just stopped talking to me, would refuse to answer my questions. And basically, I knew that my coverage of them was right. A big part of what they didn't like in my coverage was me basically forecasting that they would be gone soon, and they were all gone soon. So a lot of times those problems tend to take care of themselves.
I think another strength of yours is your ability, and it's funny, I guess, me asking this after you talk about negative relationships with players, but I think you also have some incredibly positive relationships with players and earn their trust. How do you, in your role, go about doing that with their understanding that you also have a job to do that could sometimes have a negative impact on them?
Yeah, and look, I think it's becoming more and more difficult just kind of because of the nature, not just the way the NBA is now, but, these guys, a lot of these guys kind of look at it as, why do I need to have relationships with reporters when I've got umpteen thousand or million followers on Twitter and Instagram, and they've got obviously PR teams, and they've got their agencies have PR teams, and so it's not easy. And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't have a relationship with Luka because really, I don't think any reporter really has a relationship with him because it's just not something that he's interested in. And, that's like, hey, that's the reality. That's like it's not a requirement of his job. I mean, his job is to be a really damn good basketball player, and he does that awfully well. I was hoping the Dirk influence would kind of rub off on him in terms of the way Dirk approached the media. That did not happen. But he's young. We'll see. But in terms of building relationships, I mean, you try, and again, some guys just flat out aren't interested. Luke is one very high-profile example, but certainly far from alone in that. But, number one, you got to be fair, okay? You got to be, you want them to be accessible and approachable. You have to be accessible and approachable. If they've got something, if they want to challenge you on something or complain to you, like, you have to be able to listen. And if they want to have a conversation, great. If they want to just lay into you, you got to take that too. And sometimes you got to take it in front of people. That's the way it goes. But then also, you just try to talk to people like human beings. Some of these guys you can relate with, and you try to make that happen. And again, some guys, honestly, I probably couldn't relate with, and they have no interest in relating to me, and that's fine. And in those cases, you just want to have at least a decent business relationship, a decent professional relationship.
All right, now, Tim, one of the ways, you talked about the evolution of social media. Well, one of the ways I think your industry, specifically as a writer, has evolved is now more and more writers are not just on the paper or on the internet, but on TV. Now, some are maybe like you, where you had talking experience, doing stuff on the radio. It wasn't like you were someone who had never had that sort of experience before, but what was it like as you were starting to take on more and more TV responsibility? What were some of the challenges at first, and how did you, I guess, approach those?
Yeah, and obviously I'm not doing nearly as much TV as a lot of my colleagues at ESPN. My stuff is basically limited mainly to occasional Sports Center hits and appearances on the jump. I'll do maybe a half dozen, 8-10 appearances on the jump per year. But I haven't ever sat like in the hosting chair. And so like kind of the formatics or whatever you want to call it, honestly, that's something that I'm sure I would struggle with. And I'm sure I would need a lot of work to get that part of stuff down. For me, I just don't make it too complicated. Just keep it simple. And I always just kind of try to think of it as, hey, I'm talking about sports. Let's not make this too complicated. Let's just have a conversation about sports, and let's not try to fool anybody into thinking like I'm some sort of high-level intellectual. I'm talking about freaking basketball. So keep it. Let's keep it simple. Like with the Sports Center hits. There's little things they'll coach you up on, but the most important thing is have good information. And so I'm definitely a reporter who does some TV. I'm by no stretch of the imagination any sort of TV personality. The jump is, you get a little bit more room to have some personality and to give opinions and stuff like that, and I enjoy that. But asking me for TV advice, I mean. That's kind of like asking you, how to grow to be a 6'6" guy.
That's two short jokes. That's you're below your per minute average. It's been nearly 30 minutes.
I texted you the other night with The Last Dance with Michael Jordan drilling Jerry Krause with short jokes. Now, I can give you short jokes. Now, where Jordan really had it on Krause was he could joke with him about. I don't think Krause thought it was very funny. He had the short jokes, the fat jokes, and was killing him about how he would do his job. So, you've got it pretty easy with me. You only get the short jokes.
Last thing for me, Tim, how do you, when you look at your career and what you've achieved, what do you still want to accomplish? What are some of your goals, and how do you assess what you've done and how to improve at this stage in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. And because, honestly, if you would have told me, when I was that 23-year-old who, really thought it was a great opportunity to make $7 an hour at the Denton Record Chronicle, that I'd be in this position now. Like, I would have been absolutely giddy. But I think the worst thing that can happen to anybody in our business is to get complacent, because look, it's a competitive business, and you get complacent, and you're going to get looking for another job real soon, because you're not going to keep the one you have. Having said all that, like, I think the challenge for me is to figure out how to, kind of continue growing to, at this point, I'm an MBA guy. That's just, it's not necessarily the path I chose. It is something I enjoy, but it's kind of what I've been established as. So I think the challenge for me is to continue to grow in terms of my, kind of my range, so to speak, in the NBA. I've kind of become a regional guy. Can I expand that to be, more of a national presence? How do I do that at ESPN? That's something that I've had conversations with my bosses about. Could there be other opportunities that come up for me in the future? Those are certainly things that I'd be eager to explore. But honestly, right now, it's such a uncertain time in our industry and every industry. Right now, keeping the job I have for a long time sounds pretty good.
Well, there you go, episode 60 with Tim MacMahon. Thanks so much to all of you for tuning in. As always, again, would appreciate if you'd consider subscribing or liking or commenting or just sharing this conversation with someone you think might enjoy it as well. Until next time, stay safe, be healthy, and we'll talk to you later.